Welcome to this episode of Let's Be Civil. Today, my guest on Let's Be Civil is Bill Bast. Bill Bast is a principal at Thornton Tomasetti and has been practicing structural engineering since 1983, when he moved to Chicago to work for Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. Bill is a past president of both the Structural Engineers Association of Illinois and the National Council of Structural Engineer Associations. His work focuses on existing building renovations, restorations, and forensic architecture and engineering. Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of Let's Be Civil podcast. And today I have as my guest a blast from the past, you might say, from a graduate school connection that we went to Lehigh University together. And then it was so now that I want to bring up his name, because I just was your is it nephew? Your connection with the student I had at Valpo.
Andrew Rickson.
Andrew Rickson. Yeah. What's go ahead.
He was a wrestler that I knew through my son.
You're still okay. That was so I knew that there was a wrestler. Okay, so we'll do a little edit there on my mental block. But so you knew a student of mine at Valpo, and that got us reconnected. And so Bill Bast is in Chicago, practicing professional engineer, structural too, right? SE or SE and a PE.
Yes, I have.
SE
I have an SE and a PE, right?
Yeah. You pretty much have it all, I would say, from a professional perspective. So, why don't you give us a little background of yourself? Maybe start with going to college, and how did we get to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks for having me. So I went to Lehigh University in Pennsylvania, where I'm from. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from Lehigh, where you went as well, and we were in grad school, I believe, too.
Yeah.
I graduated there in '83 and took a job in Chicago for Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, and I never thought about moving to Chicago. I thought Chicago was a place you flew over to get to California. Yet when I went there for an interview, I was so enthralled with the place, and it was so fascinating, and the history behind Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, and the state-of-the-art in design of buildings that they offered were so enticing that when I flew back to Pennsylvania from that interview, I decided if I got an offer from there, I would take it, and I got an offer and I took it. And I've been in Chicago for most of that time since 1983, and I worked for different firms. I was let go at Skidmore at one point, and eventually went to Thornton Tomasetti, where I am now. But along the lines of doing design work, I also worked as a contractor for a specialty contracting firm that specialized in repairing building facades, mostly mid-rise and high-rise buildings in Chicago. And I also worked as a construction manager for the firm today is known as Lend-Lease, but it was Shell Bovis back in the 90s when I worked there. And so when I came to Thornton Tomasetti as an engineer, I really had a lot of other construction expertise that I had developed, and I discovered I could use it working on existing buildings and doing forensic work that I ended up doing a lot of and learning about even more while I was at Thornton Tomasetti. So that's a little bit about where I came from and how I got to where I am.
So what's your position
So
right
I'm a
now?
principal now at Thornton Tomasetti, and I've worked for prestigious firms like S01 and now Thornton Tomasetti, and that's an interesting experience. Working for a firm that has a great reputation that you're now part of holding up. And it's beyond you as a person. It's being part of this company, and your reputation precedes you, not even individually, but corporately. And how to work within a large firm and following the rules and staying in your lane, as they like to say, but still being able to exercise creativity and your own personality is not easy. It's a challenge to navigate that. And I've had some successes and some big struggles with doing that. My principal, my role is to bring in work and to execute the work, oversee it, and everything till the very end of when the bill is paid and the client is happy or moves on to another project. I'm responsible for all of that, and so I don't have to be the smartest person in the room or know it all, but my role really is to figure out, how to bring all the forces that we have within the firm to bear on the project and to bring a successful project to the client. That's really my focus, and it really is very client focused, and to put myself not at the front of that, but to serve the client and to lead the group. And it could be a multidisciplinary group of structural engineers and architects and protective design people and construction engineering staff and structural engineering expertise, along with adaptive reuse or renewal or repair expertise thrown in there. And that makes it fun, but it makes it very challenging to try to serve the client that way and to do it the right way and bring all those people together in the best way for the client. So it's always a challenge, and it makes it very interesting and fun for most of the time.
I'm getting a little feedback. I don't know if that's from me or from you, but take me back to when you started at Thornton Tomasetti. Well, maybe either one if they're different when you hear what I'm going to ask. What frightened you? I think this, it's a looking at everybody's excited about a new job, but what frightened you about going to work at a prestigious place like this as a young, fresh engineer at Skidmore? And then how many years did you work there before you moved over to Thornton Tomasetti? Was that
So I started at Skidmore in '83, and I left in '87 to actually start my own business in Pennsylvania. And I did that for 3 years. And the downside of doing it myself was being, relegated to small projects. And it started out with just me, and then I built it to 6 people, including my dad, which was a great honor for me to work with him.
Yeah.
But then I closed it, and I went back to Chicago and back to Skidmore for a few years before I got laid off. And then I went to other places and ended up, at Thornton Tomasetti 21 years ago now. I've been there for 21 years. I don't know that I was scared of anything, but you certainly, I got thrown into a place where people were not all from the East Coast or from Lehigh, where I knew how things were done. They were educated at different places and from around the world. And I do remember, now that you bring it up, finding that my Lehigh education was research oriented and a bit more theoretical than practical. And as an example, right off the bat, I had to design composite beams, and I had to design composite beams with beam web openings, and I had to look at the vibration characteristics of those beams in the floor. And I think I had one composite beam homework problem at Lehigh, nothing on beam web openings, nothing on vibration. And yet my colleagues that I worked with who went to University of Illinois from the architecture school with an emphasis on engineering, they had homework problems in all of those things.
Oh, wow.
And they were at an advantage to me. And I actually remember being annoyed and mad at Lehigh for not preparing me like these other people. But that didn't last that long, because after a year or so, I realized that I actually had a better theoretical background than they did, and I understood why things were in the code, and I understood behavior better than learning all these prescriptive design examples that they had. At first I was envious of, and then I realized, I caught up to them in about a year, and now I was going beyond them because of my background. So that's probably the biggest awakening moment I had there, where I was initially, felt I was unprepared, and then I realized I was actually prepared for the long run. There's a great story, John, about Lehigh with Lee Iacocca, who was the chairman of Chrysler.
Yep.
And it started out as a mechanical engineer at Lehigh, and he was on the board of the engineering school at Lehigh when they were talking about eliminating freshman English. And everybody voted to eliminate freshman English because the technical requirements in the engineering school were just more and more demanding. And why waste your time on these general studies and electives that you didn't need? You had English in high school, why do you need it? And Iacocca voted against it. And they said, Lee, what are you talking about? Why would you not get rid of freshman English? And he said, I didn't take freshman English at Lehigh for my first job out of Lehigh. I took it for my last job, which was chairman of Chrysler, where he had to communicate and he had to write and express himself. And I thought that was a great point. And of course, that ended the discussion, and freshman English is still offered there.
And
so
probably will be
I
forever.
think colleges and universities are still very important for the education and what the people, the students learn about themselves, more so than just the textbooks and the classes, but learning how to learn, as they say, and learning about yourself and learning how to approach these difficult problems or work through problems is so important in your professional career that, that's not something you teach. It's something you experience and you work through and suffer through in many cases.
Yeah. So I was speaking with a student, and we were kind of kidding around, and I asked him, that same question: was there something that you were worried about, kind of nervous about when you first started working, and that conversation kind of evolved to this, that how come I now understand things that I didn't understand when I was a student, and it all seems so clear and so simple, now today after, I didn't understand anything when I was a student, and now it all makes sense. and there's an element of learning how to learn. That how do you go about the problem solving process? What do you do to find out the things and gain knowledge where you may not already have it? That might be the biggest path to success. I mean, it's sounding like you might agree with that it's not all the computational side of things. If you can understand how to do the work, not necessarily how to solve the equations, you can be successful, because you'll quickly advance. The computational side will catch up if it lags behind.
Right. No, I totally agree. And it makes me think of when I worked, actually first out of Lehigh, after getting my bachelor's degree, I worked at Procter & Gamble as a production plant manager and running 4 production lines, making Pampers diapers with 20 high school graduates, and I was their boss at 22 years old. And a year after that, I went to a management training class, and we worked in small groups, and we had a group of about 8 people where we were given a quiz with subjective answers, where the questions were, the best answer to this question is this, and it was multiple choice, and we answered it individually and gave it back. And then they said, okay, now we want you to answer the same questions, but as a group. And there's one answer now that the group must agree upon, however you want to do it, And I remember doing that. And when we got the results back, my individual score was higher than the group score. And I thought, wow, that must mean I'm smart. And they said, you know what, that's not really good, because, you do have good ideas, but you aren't expressing them well enough, or you're giving up on them too soon. You need to make better arguments. You need to hang in there better in these group discussions. And it was a really big learning point for me. I still remember it from 1980. And I still think about it when I'm in meetings, and I think, should I say something and look stupid, or should I, or confirm that I am stupid,
right,
as they say,
right.
Or how do you go about that? But I find that you have to test those waters, and sometimes say what other people are thinking, but they haven't really expressed, and lead people through that conversation. And I still do it. I did it earlier today. And I think that's one of the attributes I've really, worked on and honed over the years. And you need that to lead a group of people and to get everybody on the same page, or thinking about it the same way, or to open up avenues where they can be creative and not be afraid to say something. And that's, a big thing in working with groups of people, is to provide a safe environment where they're not afraid to give their opinion, or not afraid to say, I think this might be a stupid idea, but let me say it anyway. And they feel like they can contribute and bring that synergy to the group. It's hard to do, but it's required on these projects involving so many different people and so many different aspects of it. And so anyway, that was a big step that I learned from well after my formal education.
Right, and from what I'm hearing, it's kind of, you learned it on the job too. Each project brought some new experience that you held on to the good things and let the bad things go. But this evolved, so you didn't wake up one day and have this ability to lead a team.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you think that's the only way for this to happen, or do you think that there's something that could happen at say the undergraduate level, where we could help students be better prepared to at least start their career? I mean, can we shorten the window of them showing up green on the doorstep to being at least have some skill set, say in communication or just meeting etiquette or something like however you might want to define it. Do you think you can do that in the school, or is you got to learn that on the job training?
So a lot of these topics are like leadership versus management type of things. And some people say, you can't teach leadership, you have to be born a leader. But I think you can. I think there's other books that talk about, you really can't teach it, but you can develop it.
Right.
And I think the classes where teamwork is required and collaboration and how to do that. I know, schools offer that right now, but many of them are very unsuccessful. I even talking to my daughter, who is a civil engineer and graduated from MIT just a year ago. She was in group projects where, typically somebody doesn't do their job and you have to do it for them. And these miserable experiences in, so-called group work.
Yeah.
But being able to be on a team and be responsible and to learn how to collaborate and to be a leader and get that experience, I think is very valuable. And I think that's probably the best way. I mean, the typical classes that are lecture, homework, test don't offer any of that,
Right.
Type of experience. And the other thing is, the professional societies like American Society of Civil Engineering or Structural Engineers Associations. That's one reason I joined those and got active in them, because sometimes, in your career, you may not have that leadership opportunity, especially early on, but you can find it in other groups, and you might join the local SEA and the younger members forum and be doing interviews like this one with older engineers or other activities to get younger people that are your colleagues, involved in the professional association and learn, the etiquette and to have mentors. I think is a huge thing to have a mentor who, and I had many of them and I talk about them a lot, where, you watch how the mentor deals with the situation, a very difficult situation. Right now we're going through the COVID situation and people are saying like, this is where you see how people really respond and how they're really made up, is how they're responding in a crisis situation. And when you see your mentor responding to a tough meeting or a tough decision or a different approach, or being able to mitigate, a controversial issue, you learn from that. And that stuff, you can't teach very well in the classroom, but outside the classroom, there are opportunities for that. And I think inside the classroom in these collaborative project type oriented, where it's really a collaboration and people are accountable and responsible, or, those are big qualities to have in as an adult in the world.
So I would suspect that you would have a similar response, maybe with details slightly different, if we were talking about technical presentations and technical writing. That take advantage of the opportunities as they present themselves. Work on developing those skills as with each one of the opportunities, because that's how you're really going to get better at that, just as you would with interacting with people
Yes,
along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of doing all of that. I have written technical papers. I always think about Fazlur Khan, who wrote technical papers on cutting edge subjects, like, you know, designing a braced tube structure like the John Hancock Center in Chicago, or a bundled tube structure like Sears Tower, also in Chicago, and that he wrote those along the way, and then he died suddenly at 53 years old. And I've often thought, wow, you know, if he waited until he retired to write a book on all this, it would have been gone.
Right.
And at the same time, he was so confident of himself and that he was on the cutting edge of things that he wasn't afraid to divulge his secrets in these papers, because by the time they got published, he was already on to something new.
Right, right.
So, and I technical presentations I like to do even more. It's challenging to present, and I enjoy doing it, and I'm trying to do more and more of it as well. I know Charlie Thornton ended up teaching as an adjunct professor because he wanted to be challenged on his feet and to think on his feet better as an expert witness and as a leader. And he got that experience somewhat selfishly through teaching, where he was forced to do it. And like they say, you know, you don't become an expert on the subject until you end up trying to teach it. And then all of a sudden you realize, hey, I thought I knew it before, I really didn't. Now I got to teach it, and I got to learn more about it. So,
right. Well, tell me when you, maybe I should ask this first. In hiring, what, because of your position in the Chicago office, when do you get involved in hiring new engineers?
So all the time.
Okay.
I have a lot of help in finding people and getting through the interview process. But I'm involved in it. I always say, and people have said, that our most important asset is our people. It's not the office, it's not the computers and the software, but it's the people. And so I put a lot of emphasis on, you know, finding the right people that fit with our culture. I think that's a huge thing. We pick people from schools where we know what their product is, so we know the type of student we're going to get. And then really, to me, the differentiator is how well they communicate and whether they're a team player and what their experiences is. The students these days are doing more and more internships than ever. I just had an intern who was a junior in college, and his intern with us was his 5th internship.
Jeez.
So that's amazing that people are getting that type of experience. But that's probably the biggest differentiator now is, someone who has that many internships with that much experience, working and understanding what they don't like and what they like to do. It helps them refine what they're looking for when they get to that full-time decision. So I do get very involved in it, and those are some of the things that I personally look for. I'm not looking for the A+ student. I'm looking for someone who can do it as a team member and is creative and is communicative. I think are the biggest things.
So I wanted to do one follow-up on that, and then you sent me a PowerPoint presentation with some work you've been involved in, and so I wanted to end our conversation with talking a little bit about any one of those projects that you might be interested to pick. But before we do that, how do you assess this? So if I'm a young engineer, or and maybe I might be looking at my second job. I'm a graduating senior. Somebody in that age bracket, experience level. They I think be interested to hear from you. How are you assessing those skills that you were just mentioning? So, you know, you're looking for these things, but how do you know it when you see it?
The way they carry themselves. You don't hear that term a lot anymore, but I'm a big believer in how you carry yourself, not necessarily professionally, but with confidence. Just thinking back to some of the people I've been involved in recently and hiring them. One of them, it was very clear he had a very strong work ethic. He was going to school full-time, and he was working half-time at a competitor and driving 25 miles to get there and back. And his dad owned his own construction firm where he worked also. And so, right after 10 minutes of listening to this young man and finding that out, I said, make him an offer.
Right.
I don't need to hear anymore. It doesn't take long. The more you've been doing this, just like you, I'm sure, spotting good students.
Right.
You could spot them in 10 minutes, and those are the things but that's just me.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. Some people, we've had people come in and give a presentation, especially at the more senior levels.
Mm-hmm.
So we have them come in and give a presentation, and people get different things out of those presentations. So it's kind of interesting. But for the younger people, those are the things that I really look at and make decisions about.
Yeah, so it's not always, or it's not as necessarily so much about the computational process.
No, because students that come from schools that you're familiar with, you're going to get a good product, and and that's why you're recruiting there in many cases.
Right.
And so we don't give tests. I'm not a believer in giving a test to a student to judge their aptitude at that point. I don't think you need to. I think the bigger thing is all these other things outside the classroom, and their maturity,
Right.
and able to be responsible, and their volunteer activities or their hobbies or their interests tell a lot about them as well.
Yeah.
We had a guy who built electric guitars, and I thought that was really cool. I mean, I'm a musician too, and being a musician is related to engineering and math for one thing, but being able to be a craftsman like he was, it actually drew me to hire him as an intern, and he's gone on to be a very successful engineer.
Nice. Well, let's take a couple minutes and look at one of your projects here. So let me share the screen, and I think I need to. Oops. That we can close. The PowerPoint's here. I'm gonna make you a co-host and let you drive the bus. So whatever part of this that get rid of that. Come on. It may be just having a little lag time with it being in the cloud. So, do you want to? You should have control over the screen now. Do you? Let's see. I thought
I don't seem to be able to.
I'll make you the host. I'll elevate you even further. How about now? No?
No.
Okay.
But
here.
Why don't you go to the Navy Pier project, John, that you had mentioned to me earlier, and I can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, this is, I think, 102 slides.
Yeah, it's big.
Do you remember where that is, the Navy Pier? Or just
No,
grab
but
it? Yeah, we'll just catch it by the looking at the pictures along the way here.
keep going.
Is that part of it? This the
Yeah,
Ferris wheel?
yes,
So would it go back this direction here? Yeah,
yes.
there's
And,
Navy Pier, Navy Pier. Okay. Yeah, here we go. This is the
and if
maybe
you,
the start.
I would say, hang on, go to slide 45 there. I think maybe we
Okay,
could
this
talk
one right
from.
here.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not seeming to want to. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So just to talk about this one, I worked on in 1992 when I moved to Renovations and Mesilla after I was let go at S01, which was at the time I was let go. It was not a fun thing, but it was a blessing in disguise. I actually had a lead from SOM to the position at Renovations and Mesilla where they were looking for the project manager to lead the Pier project in 1992. It was a time of downturn in the economy, and it was the biggest job under design in Chicago. They were part of a design competition that had been won by VOA, the architect, and the team. And so I worked on this job where we redeveloped the pier that had been around since 1914 and served different uses and fell into disrepair. And we tore down everything that's highlighted in that red box. And we drilled in 700 new caissons in between the existing wood pile caps to create this, low-rise exhibition hall and a festival hall and kind of a carnival-like atmosphere, including a Ferris wheel, which was, harkening back to the 1893 original Ferris wheel by George Ferris from the Columbian Exposition. So we did our own version of it, although we had to put it up on top of a upper level of a parking area. So this was a low-rise structure. It's only about 60 feet tall at its tallest point, but it was very long. It's almost a mile long. So it posed its own challenges, and I submitted it for an award at the Structural Engineers Association of Illinois, and it won an award as a special project. And what I thought was most interesting about it was that we used so many different materials, steel and cast-in-place concrete and precast concrete, fabric tensile structure that you see there on the left of center of the Skyline stage structure. We used a steel space frame for the festival hall on the right, and we used timber and we used concrete block. So we used all these different materials, and during the construction of it, I often referred to it as the Noah's Ark of construction because we had two of every contractor. We had two cast-in-place contractors for the concrete. We had two precast concrete contractors. We had two steel contractors because the job was so big. So it was very fun and rewarding to work on it. And then 25 years later, while I was at Thornton Tomasetti, we were asked to come back as part of this Centennial vision that you're showing there.
Okay.
And for its anniversary in 20 Ferris wheel, and to update all these all these things that were outdated, like this image on the lower right that you just showed.
Oh, here, right here.
Yeah, and then so here I think we show all the different things we did with the new Shakespeare Theater out there, and the new Ferris wheel and other structures. And this part of this particular talk, I think I called it "Creativity is Born of Constraint," because here all these different design aspects that we were doing were constrained by the existing conditions and the configurations and the capacities of what we had done 25 years before, forcing us to be creative in ways to support the new Ferris wheel and the new Shakespeare Theater, using all kinds of things in our toolbox that we had developed and I had learned about over the years, including micropiles and post-tension concrete, and bridging across expansion joints, and things like that were a big challenge. The lower right image is the Navy Pier Hotel. It's under construction right now, that we designed a few years ago. And that's going to be a great addition. And that one, we had to drill through the South Dock with new caissons to support that. And we had to go above existing and create that level, which is about where the two different types of glass meet horizontally. And then we did a stick-framed cold form steel construction on top of the platform for 5 levels to create the new hotel. So it was really, forcing us to be creative structurally with all these constraints that are imposed. And I think one of the American authors I quoted saying that, creativity is born of constraint. You'd think you'd be most creative on a greenfield site where you can do whatever you want, but really, you're forced to be creative when you have all these constraints on you, and trying to find the solution that fits all those constraints is really challenging and fun.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So these are some of the renderings then, I guess, of. So this is
That's
that
a rendering
part.
of that's the Shakespeare Theater, and the
Right.
addition we did is underneath that white tent.
Over here.
Yeah, and then the curving glass lobby in front of it.
Oh, here, yeah.
Right there was part of our project. And so we took the existing Skyline stage tent and we kept it in place, but we added a new theater underneath it, which is
This down
has
here?
movable seating towers that are 30 feet tall. No, actually on the left.
On
the left side.
this one over here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have 35 foot tall seating towers that move on like a hydrofoil or airfoil on a cushion of air on a very flat dance floor that we created to allow different seating configurations and state-of-the-art in theater design. So and we put it there strategically, working with the architects and the stage people to be able to connect to the pre-existing theater on the right side, where you can see the Shakespeare sign on it. So putting it there was very strategic. It solved a lot of problems that had existed with the Skyline stage itself. It was not used like it was envisioned, and so we snuck this thing in there between the Ferris wheel on the left and the old Shakespeare Theater on the right, and created a whole new theater space.
That's just so cool looking. Oh, and then seeing some of it from the inside. This is the back of the napkin works that you guys did? Is that? Yeah, the napkin sketch.
That's the back of the napkin sketch.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And,
I'm just going to
that's not by us, but it's by the theater designer. But yeah, that's showing the the seating towers, and there's the seating tower itself, the isometric of it. We
Yeah.
used a laser scan. We used a laser scan in there because we didn't know how tall those tubes were that formed the structure of the tent.
Got
The
it.
drawings we had were conflicting. So the laser scan showed it was about 3 feet shorter than we thought from the drawings.
Mm.
So it was very good that we did all that work because we used every cubic inch of space underneath that tent.
I'm just going to cycle through these real quick, see if there's, because we'll need to come back and have some more conversation about this for sure, and especially with a slide stack of 102 slides. You got more interesting projects in there. So what are these here? We'll take a peek at this, and then we'll probably have to call this a day for us. So
yeah, those are just that's a sample of the air grates that we had to work around. They were cast into the floor slab to allow air circulation no matter what configuration the seating towers were in. I think there were 8 or 9 possible configurations. So these had to work around all of those, and we had to make that integral with the structure. And this is the dance floor I was talking about that we created, and we did it as a composite steel floor. Speaking of composite steel again. But one thing we did here was, because these spans are 60 feet, we designed a composite topping slab on top of the structural slab, with the idea being that the topping slab would be able to be created and be very level and flat, so the air casters could work well. And I was very concerned about being able to do that with these 60-foot spans with camber and deflection and all that. So we did camber, but we did the slab, a composite steel slab, to create a very level and flat surface, and it worked very well.
very cool, very cool. Well, and this is I think you mentioned, this is the second time you've worked on the Navy Pier.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was fortunate to be able to go back there 25 years later. Yeah.
Right. Could you believe it was 25 years when you went back?
No. No, I just know I'm very fortunate and blessed to be able to have done it.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that I think I've mentioned this to you prior to my departing the area for coming down to Texas, but Chicago is my most favorite city that I have been to, and it's not like I've been to all the great cities around the world, but I love going to Chicago. I don't know how I would enjoy living, I mean, it's got its issues with traffic and such, like every place else, but it's everything has their unique take on traffic. But I'm dying in Texas without having access to all that food from Chicago. That's if I'm in Chicago, I plan there are certain places we're going to eat before heading home, because boy, the variety and the quality of food in Chicago is pretty good, and I joke around with people down here that we can go for barbecue, and then Tex-Mex, and then if you're interested, we could go for barbecue, and if you're not up for that, we could try Tex-Mex, and so that's and my family says the same thing. The hardest part of leaving that area was the food. So. But the blue-skinned apartment complex that kind of looks over the museum area and Soldier Field. So there's a recently built high-rise blue. I've decided if I were to win the lottery, that's where I'd be moving to, that building right there. I don't have the floor picked out or any of that sort of stuff yet, but I know what building I want to live in if I end up moving to Chicago. So that tells you something. So,
That's great.
Well, sir, I mean, this is a great conversation. Anytime I get a chance to see you and talk to you, I enjoy it immensely. You get involved in a lot of very fascinating and very high level important projects, and I find that really enjoyable to hear how all those things come together, and the commitment involved by everybody, and it's just and hearing some of the inside kind of, you know, behind the scenes stories on some of these projects too is very cool. So we'll most definitely have to get back online again in the future and pick one of these out and just let's talk engineering and work through some of those 100 plus slides and get into some gory detail. So
Well, thank you for the nice words,
Yep.
and I'll be happy to do that.
yeah, well, thanks for being a guest on Let's Be Civil, and we'll start working on our next conversation here soon. So
Thank you, John.
yep, take it easy. Have a good rest of your day.
All right, and we're done.
Yep. Yeah, we're done.
Well, it's great
See you.
catching up with you, and I wish you the best, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. If you for any reason are coming in our direction, you need to let me know, because I'll have a lineup of people to come to talk to you. Make a little presentation, and we'll line them up to come to see if we can get them to move from Texas to Chicago for work. So.
All right, John, very good.
All right.
It's great catching up with you.
Yep. Talk to you soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.